Hello, hello, hello. Good evening, people. Good afternoon, good morning, depending where you're tuning in from. And welcome to another live stream. Today, we are going to be on the website. So, few shout outs first of all before I get going. Those of you who've been waiting patiently in the room, Macy, Tatankara, Ashley, Renaissance Woman, Katrina, RJ Mackenzie, Zehoven. What's going on, people? It's fantastic to have you all here. I'm not sure what your name is, but is that Getters that's written in? Maybe you can let me know what that says. I'm sure I've got that script wrong as well. Whoever wrote Ibrahim Traore. But yes, big up Ibrahim Traore. Actually, I feel like I need to post more and talk more about this revolutionary, fantastic African leader, and also my increasing um, my increasing desire to actually get if I continue to get signals from the coming from the government or coming from the leaders that be regarding any kind of military or ICC or any of that baloney that's running around the rumor mill. If I get any inkling of that, I will get active. I've just made my mind up. I will get active. There's no way I'm gonna sit around and while they think they can just go and trouble or take out an African leader, I will not be having. I won't be having none of it. I'm sorry. Sat around, tried to do my online protests, whatever. When they started invading Libya, didn't do enough. This time around, nah. This time around, it's no. We have to. To me personally, I feel like we have to protect him like he's one of ours. And I don't care if I got to camp outside of the Houses of Parliament. I will do it. Ain't yeah. I'm not having any of it. So I'm not trying to hear a bar of that nonsense that they're trying to put out there. Tigrinya, thank you for letting me know. Oh, get us. So let's get a script and you're Tigrinya. Very well. Welcome. It's really nice to have you. Yeah, so thank you all of those who have joined me online. We now have more than 50 in the room and the numbers are creeping up nicely. Um, Today's live stream, if you've seen the thumbnail, actually centers around our website. And if you don't know, let me just quickly pop the link into the website in the chat. Right, let me just copy it because then it will actually be a hyperlink. And I'll pin it as well. In the last live stream I did, we launched the TKM edu, so tkmedu.com site. I'm just popping a link in the chat now. Okay. And I think I'll pin that as well. If you haven't subscribed to the site, please subscribe to the site. I'm increasingly feeling like it's going to be quite expedient for me to have other means of communicating with you guys as a community that are outside of the given social networks, because what can happen on these social networks. I mean, they can just disappear overnight. So if you subscribe to the site, that actually gives me your email address. It puts you on a mailing list, but it just gives me a way to contact you irrespective. I mentioned obviously before what happened to Africa Stream. And obviously, I'm not sending any of that energy my way. I don't believe that's going to happen. I feel like this channel was here to stay, and there's really nothing that's going to, nothing but positivity and growth. But at the same time, as a result of, I still get updates from Africa Stream, for instance, because I'm a part of their Telegram group. So they still have that bit of community. But if I didn't have that little bit of communication, that would just be a totally dead network. And let's not make things too easy, so to speak, for the powers that be. Let's try and be a little bit more. So anyway, if you care about any of that, please go to the site, subscribe. So I've got your email address, and let's continue to grow via multiple networks, so we can't be held prisoner to any single one. One moment, everybody. Sorry about that. My daughter just brought me in a cup of tea. I don't think she wants to get caught on cam on one of my live streams. So there you go. I'll turn my back to the mic so you don't get any ASMR. All right. So niceties out of the way. Good evening, everybody. Yes, a Black History website, awesome it is. And I feel like, let me actually just quickly have a little preamble regarding the website. Because today, during today's live stream, I'm going to go through 2 articles on the website. And the articles are based on live streams that I've done before, just kind of summarizing the information that was unveiled during those live streams and putting it in a really concise, succinct, useful, straight to the point package that you can then refer to. It becomes a very easily referenceable piece of material. And I think that's really important that we do that. Now, the website is in its very early iteration. So you can just consider this kind of like the first increment of delivery when it comes to this website. And there will be, it will get, I will say it will get incrementally better. And I actually can promise you that, because even within the few days since we've launched, we've already thought of ways to improve the website. We're going to improve the references. We're going to improve the quality of the articles. We're going to improve the interconnectivity between the articles. I think in terms of a vision, I'm not setting a lid for this. I'm setting the bar very high, and I'm continually moving it upwards in terms of what the capabilities of this site are. In terms of the content as well, I've got very exciting plans of the kinds of people that I want to partner with, because I think the website has the capability to grow into something much larger. And obviously, my passion more than anything is to make all of this information available and to make it freely available. Those of you who've been subscribed to me for the 2.5 years that I've been running the King's Monologue, that I don't shove stuff behind paywalls or anything like that. Any giving that you do needs to be voluntary, because something's added value to you. And I did put the message out actually to when I launched the site a few days ago, just to kind of like say to you guys, if you enjoy it and if the site's useful to you and you share that vision with me, that we can reach more people, start reaching different educational institutions, please do offer a donation if it's comfortable and within your means to do so. And loads of people answered that call. When I say loads, it wasn't like loads, but there's quite a few people who gave donations, and I'm really, really grateful. And I must stress how grateful I am. Anyway, like I said, subscribe to the site. Please use it. Please share the articles. Let's get the domain authority up. There's so many visions I have in terms of what this site can do. One of the main reasons and the driving forces actually for me having this site was the image authority. We want to start ranking when people search for images of pharaohs. We want the Black images to come up. And this is not just the images, the reconstructions, but this is also the naturalistic portraits and the naturalistic statues that are hidden for the general public. This is about proliferating this information as much as possible. Thank you, RJ, who said he'll share it with his professors at uni. That would be amazing. So yeah, there's so much to do. I'm going to continue to write, although it's just kind of the website is filled with lots of different articles, like I said, 2 of which we're going to touch on today. There's also the academic section where I'll be continuing to contribute and add to my academic papers. I do mention quite a bit, and I'll mention it again. The paper that I did on Amenhotep III, just refuting the general field of facial forensic reconstruction and critique in that field. That paper has been looked upon really brightly, and I'm not just saying that. I can, without mentioning any names and without giving you any, this is a no cap statement, without giving you any exaggeration, I can tell you right now, I've had commendations from 2 professors and 2 PhDs and 1 curator of a museum in the UK who said that the paper was excellent and he found it very, very informative. Okay, so that's, you know, 5 relatively high, and that's aside from the named academics that I know who have read it. One of the people that I mentioned who's actually on Cesare Moraes' team, an Egyptologist who's quite famous, Michael Habicht, he's read the paper. Loads of people have read the paper. So in spite of perhaps not going down the traditional route, and there's other things in the works, but that aside, besides not going down the traditional route in terms of how these things are released and how these things are normally published, we can still get our information, we can still get our message out there. And I can tell you, for one, there was one particular professor who was very skeptical when I said I wrote a paper, and they really quickly rebuked me, said, you know, not anyone can just do that, and, you know, you make sure you know what you're doing. And they weren't doing it out of a place of spite, by the way. This is someone who I had a really good conversation with, but they were just kind of like giving me a warning. And then they said, well, just send it to me anyway and I'll have a look. And literally within a few hours of sending it to them, they'd read it from start to finish, and they said, oh my God, I was so pleasantly surprised. This was excellent. This is one of the best refutations. And actually, you've proved to me, I wasn't aware how much guesswork was involved in the field of forensofacial reconstruction. So you've actually converted me. So I was like, woohoo. that had me gassed for a little while. So anyway, I say all that to say this: the site's live, use it. We're going to go for a couple of articles. So let's get cracking as I take another sip of my tea today. So the title of the live stream, if I remember, is Skin Color in Ancient Egypt in a Nutshell. And there's 2 articles that are on the website that I really think do a very good job of summarizing how skin color is used in ancient Egyptian portraiture. Okay, I think there's 2 articles here that we're going to go through one by one. I think hopefully after I've read through these articles with you guys, you'll feel encouraged and perhaps feel emboldened, to make up a word. Actually, I'm never sure if emboldened is a word. I'm pretty sure I got it from The Simpsons. But you'll feel relatively encouraged to use the website as a resource to read through some of the other articles that we have there, because I like I said, we're gonna get better. These gonna get better. My team who's working on these articles and working really hard to basically summarize a lot of my long live streams into these really succinct articles. We're working our socks off, but I think it's all going to be worthwhile. So yeah, it's a word. Thank you, Chris. I'm glad. I'm glad it's a word. I wasn't sure, because I remember there's an episode of Simpsons when, anyway, let's not go into that. So laughing to myself, giving myself a joke, and I must stop. Raise Jed, thank you very much for your $4 donation. No comment from you, but I thank you very much. Yeah. And let me give you a quick welcome to my newest member as well, Christian Nyhughes. Christian Nyhughes, thank you very much for becoming a member and supporting the channel that way. What an amazing community. Okay, without further ado, I do feel the need now to get cracking. So I'm going to go straight to the website. And this is for those of you who've never used a website before. Into navigation, click on articles. And the 2 articles that we're going to be covering today is actually these first 2 that do such a really fantastic job. Now, one of my team members, Inyabo, has worked incredibly hard helping me putting these papers together, you know, using the content that I've got posted online, and then me and him going back and forth and really getting them up to a decent standard. And like I said, with the aim of these articles being strong and being robust, we're adding to them. So even just today, we were adding more and more content to these articles to make them even stronger. So yeah, let's dive in. So I think the article I want to start with is this one. I want to start with this article, how dark is black? And then when we're finished with this one, we're going to jump into the red race one. And you're going to see why I've said these two articles, I think, give a really good definitive description as to how color was used in portraiture in ancient Egypt, with really, hopefully, good rationale behind each one. So yeah, that's the outlay for today. If it sounds interesting, stick around. If not, feel free to not stick around. There's 114 people here currently. Hit up the likes, please, as much as possible. I think we've got 64 likes, which is pretty decent. And let's get going. So, how dark is black? And obviously, just starting with the thumbnail, and obviously starting with that really obvious talking point, which for some reason, for some weird reason, we as melanated people find ourselves constantly having to explain to people that actually, I'm not going to say all of us, but for most of us, our skin is not actually black. Okay, there's a range of skin tones from light brown to medium brown to deep rich brown to dark brown, and then you do get some black people, and then you get even some blue/purple black people. But the bottom line is the range of skin complexions within the native or indigenous African races is very vast. It's incredibly vast. And what needs to be understood by everybody who tackles the subject of Nile Valley civilizations, being ancient Egypt, Kush, North African civilizations, Central African civilizations, is if you do not approach this subject, Southern African civilizations, West African civilizations, if you do not approach this subject with that nuance in mind, you really don't have any business being there. Okay. Golmoth just used the word chestnut, which is an excellent word. You're going to see why. You're going to see why. Okay. So, yeah, when we go through this article, hopefully this is going to open your eyes to some things. But it's amazing how many people think that if you are going to present someone who in the modern time, bear in mind race is a modern social construct, who in the modern time would be described as quote unquote black, they think that everyone would just pick up a black pen or a piece of charcoal and draw that person and not actually try to get their exact skin color. Well, these two articles, once you're going through them, you're going to see they're going to prove that that's actually incorrect. James, welcome. Thank you very much. You've become a member. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Stewart. I appreciate you becoming a member of the channel. All right, let's get cracking. So, how dark is black? And obviously, you can see the statue, well, or this shrubti, I should say, of Tutankhamun. And even this one that's relatively deeply colored, this one has been sanded down. It used to be a much richer and deeper black. There's only a couple, just a small handful of shabtis of Tutankhamun that have survived being retouched or restored, I should say, in inverted commas. They've all been restored, unfortunately. It's really sad to do. But anyway, we'll touch on that hopefully. Now, I had this video called Ramesses Racism. I'm not sure if people had seen this. And I actually think it might be a decent idea to start off by watching this because it's not the longest video in the world. Now, some of my thoughts have progressed since posting this video. This video is I think it's over 2 years old now. So it's I can't believe you've been around for that long, to be totally honest with you. Excuse me. Yeah, so this video is over 2 years old now, but I think it does a really good job. Yeah, let's watch this video. Because I think that'll actually be a good place to start. And then we can dive into the article afterwards, because I think the article does feed off of what's said on the video. So bear with me one moment. I just need to do another present, because I've got to share the audio. Click on that. New tab. There we go. It's got to play an ad, isn't it? Let's pause that. Okay. Got it. All right, so there we go. Just when this starts playing, just click a 1 in the chat if the audio comes through and everything's okay. And as soon as I see the 1, I'll just let it keep playing. I don't intend on stopping this at all. So please pay attention, because this is going to be the 1 playthrough that we get. And then we're going to dive straight into the article.
Have you seen this image before? Well.
Uh-oh. I had to know that was going to happen. Okay, let's not waste any time. Let's copy that. Let's close that, and let's open up an Edge window, because I've learned that that's the only way you can fix that problem. Those of you who've been on my live stream before will know that I get this recurring problem. Doesn't want to play one of the videos that I'm trying to play during a live stream. Go figure. I haven't been able to. Let's try again. Let's see if this works.
B&Q and Trade Point's big You Can Do It sale is now on. Get £500 on a kitchen and 20% off bathrooms when you spend £750 on a bathroom.
Sorry, guys.
Have you seen this image before? Well.
Go away. All right.
If you've ever visited the British Museum, or have been unfortunate enough to be embroiled in a discussion regarding the race of the Egyptians, then this no doubt will be familiar to you. According to some, this image provides proof that the ancient Egyptians couldn't possibly be like other Africans, because they are fighting the Nubians, who are also Africans. Aside from the basic observation that sharing a race or phenotype has never in history prevented war between nations, consider Ukraine for a recent example. Also note that Ramses himself is depicted in the same brown-red hue as half of the Nubians with whom he was fighting. Contrast this with opposing murals depicting the Battle of Kadesh or the Siege of Dapur, in which the Syrian forces are depicted in a completely different tone and phenotype to the king. Yet no similar accusations are made about Ramses' racial hatred towards the Levantine, perhaps because the distinction between the modern populations is notably smaller. Also consider that when similar scenes are depicted on the war chest of Tutankhamun, whether he marches against the Nubians or the Syrians, his Egyptian standard-bearers are alternating shades of dark and medium brown. Generally buried in the Valley of the Kings, the position and title of fan-bearer on the king's right hand reflected the close personal relationship with the pharaoh himself and demanded a strong military connection as the lead of the pharaoh's bodyguard, the trusted military commander in charge of the domestic relations with African territories. The actual office of fan-bearer was known as a cheku. This highlights the reality that these are not depictions of distinct racial groups, but rather accurate expressions of domestic variety of complexion and phenotype. As such, our modern epithet of distinct racial groups have no bearing on the reality of what is being communicated. This highlights a much deeper ignorance in society, rooted in bias and modern ideas of racism. That is a total lack of appreciation for African phenotypic diversity. Consider this man, this man, this man, and this man. They are all black by modern socio-political standards, but they exhibit a broad range of complexions and phenotype. However, ignorance would lead some to believe that ancient Egyptians saw all these types of people as one, whom they portrayed in this fashion. Does that seem plausible to you? Is it not much more likely that this woman would be depicted like this, and this woman like this? Is it not much more likely that this man would be depicted in this manner, and this man in this manner, and so on? Modern racial prejudice attempts to euphemize African diversity and use an inaccurate monolithic perspective as a weapon to eliminate evidence and separate Africans from history. It's not only impossible, but frankly, it's silly to attempt to apply a one-face-fits-all approach to African diversity. The artists and people of the ancient world paid attention and respect to the nuance of phenotype and culture expressed between and within the various groups depicted in their works. Race is not an ancient construct, and as such, no attempt would have been made to euphemize all these distinctions into a single meaningless racial group. something we only do in today's backwards thinking society. But in reality, when African diversity is respected, you will see it all over Kemet, Nubia, and the ancient world. Thank you for joining me on The King's Monologue, a place where we are
Okay, so let's pause it there, finish it. So, how many of you have seen that before? That's quite an old video. I know the OGs would have seen it before, but some of you might be new. If that was new, just let me know in the chat that you haven't seen that before. And if it's like, you know, encourage you to go back and have a look at some of my older videos, I would certainly encourage you to do that. But yeah, there you go. So that's a relatively old video. And, you know, watching it back, it's got some really strong, I think, and obviously logical, is the point, logical arguments. Now, in terms of relevance, let's just jump into that article, because really that's what the article is about. And what you'll actually find is, as we go through this article, like I said, we're spending a lot of time doing additional research and strengthening some of the things that are maybe relatively that we perhaps took for granted when that video was made, and making sure that we cross all the I's and dot all the T's. So let's go in anyway. I think I've done enough of a, you know, introduction, preface. Let's just get straight in. So the misinterpretation of Ramesses II's depiction. Now, the first, in fact, I'm going to zoom in because I think we've got a lot of width to fill up here. Will it let me? Okay, I'm zooming the wrong thing. Let's click here. There we go. Okay, great. So we're almost full screen now. Fabulous. So the misinterpretation of Ramesses II's depictions. Now, I know most of you will know, but this is on display in the British Museum. And we found out some very interesting things about this. So first thing is a caption here, and it says, facsimile of Ramesses II warring against Nubians, dated from 1279 to 1213 BC, 19th dynasty, which is on display in the British Museum. The original relief at Bayt al-Wali is now weathered and faded. This represents what the reproduction artist may have observed. Now, why did we say may have observed? You'll see in a moment why we're not so certain that this is exactly what they saw, and there's many reasons. So let's go in. The depiction of Ramesses II fighting the Nubians has been widely circulated, particularly in institutions like the British Museum, and the British Museum love to do too much when it comes to talking about Egyptian history. They love to do too much, but we're in the process of exposing them. Remember the statue short that I released recently of Sekhem Waj Tawi Ra of the 13th dynasty, who they changed to Sobekhem Saf? That was the British Museum, the ones who broke his nose, one who had a very clearly African nose in the early 19th century, early 20th century, late 19th century, and in modern time it's completely gone. They broke his nose off. So the British, don't think of them as some professional outfit. They are at the apex of this, you know, race fixing when it comes to ancient Kemet. But anyway, let's carry on. Some have pointed to these images as proof that the ancient Egyptians were not black, arguing that since the Egyptians are shown fighting against the Nubians, they must be of a different race. So obviously the video touched on that already. However, such claims ignore historical complexities and reveal a broader misunderstanding of African phenotypic diversity, as we spoke about. Interestingly, the original image, and this is what shows below, doesn't appear to show conflict. Now, this is going to be very, very much a revelation to many of you, because I postulated it as a possibility to my team. And then as we researched, we realized it seemed to be more than a possibility. Now, I'm going to pause there really quickly and just give a quick thank you to James. He said, the idea that the ancient Egyptians weren't black was rooted in the Hamitic theory and the concept of brown-skinned Caucasians, which is just ridiculous. Because the only people, let me reiterate that, the only people on this earth, on this realm, who have actual brown skin. And I'm not talking about the brown races, because many of the brown races are cream. Many of them are wheat colored. But we're not talking about cream and wheat. We're talking about brown. And the only groups of people that have brown skin are native Africans, currently let's say extant population, because we know historically it was more than that. But let's talk about current populations are native Africans, native Southern Asians, and Melanesians. Okay, those are the people who actually have. So if you're talking about modern population groups that actually have actual brown skin, yeah, it's people who are linked some ways with one of those populations. Modern coastal North Africans, modern Levantine people, and obviously not all of them. We're just talking about the ones that came from Turkey, etc., from the steppes regions, etc. But the ones who in modern times dominate these regions do not have brown skin. They might be called the brown races, but their skin is not brown. It certainly doesn't match the ancient Egyptians. Okay, so that color brown is another thing that's being co-opted from the black race, which is very interesting. You know, it's funny how they cross over and switch between semantics and literal descriptions. And they take a literal picture of someone painted brown and then call them a member of the brown race. It's interesting how they do that. It's real trickery. But anyway, that's a side note. Let me carry on. So I'm going to read that sentence again. Interestingly, the original image doesn't appear to show conflict, but perhaps portrays Ramesses marching with and not against the Nubian bowmen, since their bows are facing in the same direction. Be it, and I'm going to show you that again. So if you see this thing, now they've been very careful to smear cement over the left half of it. But if you look, the Nubians are marching in the same direction as Ramesses. They do not have their arrows facing towards him. And I know the argument's going to be made, well, they haven't got their arrows facing towards him because they're fleeing from him. And obviously, this part of the image would suggest to you, oh, they are fleeing from Ramesses. The problem is, it's really, really hard to locate this part of the image. You can see this part where they're marching in the same direction as him, and you can see Ramesses with his arrow aimed forward, but we don't see beyond that. Now, is there any other evidence to suggest that this might be the case? Bear with me, because there is. Let's carry on. Biat al-Wali, the location of the original relief, is located 50 kilometers south of Aswan. Now, many of you will know that Aswan is in almost the furthest reaches of Upper Egypt. Okay, so it's right in the south of Egypt, well into the territory of Tarseti and approaching Kush. So this relief is essentially in modern-day Nubia. Okay, this relief sits well within modern-day Nubia. Okay, and it always has been there. Just like a lot of, and by the way, I'll just throw this out as a little side note, just like a lot of many of Ramesses' monuments, Ramesses the Great, who allegedly hated Nubians, seem to have a lot of monuments in Nubia. Did you notice that? His temple at Abu Simbel, the great temple of Ramesses the Great, is situated well within Nubia. Why is that the case? Why is it the case that they've shown you a depiction of conflict, but when you see the relief from the walls, it doesn't seem like there is a conflict? It looks like the Nubians are marching with Ramesses and the Egyptians' chariots. And you have to be very careful. So let's carry on. Actual raw relief at the temple in Bayt al-Wali. So these are the three images of it. The question of the conflict and the original colors used is one that does need to be addressed, since both are questionable. And I will stand on that. Once again, I'm very open if someone can prove, but I have to tell you right now, locating the full relief is very difficult. And I find that puzzling, because if everyone's aware that a reproduction of this relief exists, surely you should be able to get the full picture. And it just kind of makes me think about other reliefs that reproduction artists kind of bring back to life, and everybody focus on the facsimile but don't focus on the actual relief. Because I'm thinking about the tomb of Seti here, where they created that table of nations, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, the table of races, and they did those four awful drawings of the four races of the earth, and yet it looks nothing like the tomb. So can you see how that same trickery is likely at play here? It's definitely a question to be asked. But and obviously the other question is, where are these colors? Where are these colors? It's definitely something that needs to be raised in terms of a conversation. African diversity and misguided assumptions. A key flaw in the arguments levied by Afro-denialists, I'm going to start using that term more, by the way, please do use it with me, is the assumption that racial homogeneity prevents conflict. History has shown that shared ethnicity or phenotype has never been a barrier a barrier to war between nations. In other words, people of the same ethnic, when I say ethnic, same physical stock fight all the time. Modern conflicts such as that between Russia and Ukraine exemplify this. Furthermore, African diversity encompasses a wide range of complexions and features. To assume that ancient Egyptians saw all Africans as monolithic racial group misrepresents the nuanced ways in which they depicted different populations. No modern African society possesses this binary view on race. None, to be clear. Most African nations, a majority, near enough all, have a massive amount of phenotypic variance. African nations and African people are not like Europeans. What do I mean when I say this? Europeans are phenotypically and genotypically very, very narrow. Okay, they come from a very small subset of the fullness of the African range. They come from a tiny subset. And as a result, when you look within a single European nation, you're not going to get that huge amount of phenotypic variance. Most people are going to have the same skull shape. Most people are going to have the same gnathic projection, i.e., they're going to be retrognathic or orthognathic. Most people are going to, have the same texture of hair, etc., etc., etc. You don't get this in African nations. In a single African nation, you're going to get everything from the darkest person normally to a really light-skinned people. You're going to get people who are retrognathic all the way to prognathic. You're going to get people who are brachycephalic all the way to dolichocephalic. That's the kind of range you get within African groups. So you can't simplify us using the same type of rules or the same kind of language that's used outside of the African continent. That there is a reason why Africans, genomic diversity needs to be addressed and not ignored, because people do miss things like this about African nations, especially when they try and come up with things like the true Negro trip, which never plays out. Quick shout out to surfactant. If it's a reproduction, then why have they made it look like a damaged original? Because that's what they do. That's what they do, because they want their reproduction to have authority in the minds of the people. And what's really funny, when I was at the British Museum, because of that reproduction, I assumed the Neberman portraits were also a reproduction. So I asked the curator, "Oh, is this a reproduction as well?" She's like, "No, that's an original." So the Neberman portrait, they chiseled that off a New Kingdom wall and they brought that to the British Museum. But that one is a reproduction, and it's interesting. There's always seems to be a racial agenda when it comes to stuff like this, when it comes to the British Museum and ancient Egypt, as you guys have seen. Anyway, let's carry on. But obviously, very good point there, surfactant. Let's carry on. No modern African society possesses this binary view on race. In most African nations, ethnicity, culture, and language supersede superficial constructs such as complexion and hair texture. I'm going to read that again because it's really important to understand this. No modern African society possesses this binary view on race. In most African nations, ethnicity, culture, and language supersedes superficial constructs such as complexion and hair texture. And this is just a fact, okay? People are going to fall into their ethnicity not towards this social construct, this invented thing called race, where people are arbitrarily being grouped by things like complexion. It doesn't exist in Africa, okay? In the Biafran War, they weren't going after light skins and dark skins and this, that, and the other. No, that was two ethnicities, many of whom were light skinned, many of whom were dark, well, multiple, but anyway, many of whom were light skinned, many of whom were dark skinned, many of whom had wavy hair, many of whom had really strong, kinky hair. People with wide faces and wide skulls, people with narrow skulls. None of that mattered when it came down to it. All that mattered is which ethnicity do you belong to? Okay, that's how it works. So bringing that binary view of race doesn't work in an African society. Let me carry on. Racial similarities between Egyptians, Nubians in inverted commas, and Kushites. Now, there's a reason I've put Nubians in inverted commas, and I have taken some time to explain why. Those of you who've been members of this channel or subscribers for a little while will know what I'm about to say about the Nubians, but it's important, and this is why I want to start with this article. Ancient Egypt and the region of the African continent regarded as Nubia have a shared history dating as far back as the birth of Kemet as a civilization. The place that we in the modern era regard as Nubia was actually the first, pay attention, and in many ways the most important state of the two lands, being Tawi. So when Kemet was established in the Old Kingdom, it was called Tawi, which basically means the two lands. Established by Nama, the first king. It has been a strategy of Egyptologists, please pay attention, to regard this city, Tar Seti, as a cultural and ethnic isolate, unique and separate from the land we know as Egypt. I'm going to read that sentence again because it's really important. It has been a strategy of Egyptologists to regard this city, Tar Seti, and you can check a nome list or Sepat list if you want right now. Look at the Sepats or the nomes of ancient Egypt. You will see Sepat number 1 is Tar Seti, or nome number 1 is Tar Seti. Okay, and it's been a strategy of Egyptologists to regard this city, Tar Seti, as a cultural and ethnic isolate, unique and separate from the land we know as Egypt. So if you get into reading the Medunetta, which I have done, you will note that actually Egyptians, people of Kemet, Tawi, whatever you want to call it, they rarely, I'm not going to say rarely, they didn't refer to the whole land as much as they refer to individual city-states, okay, like Waset, like Ra-Nefer, like Tar Seti. Okay, so they would constantly refer to people of the various Sepats or city-states of ancient Egypt or ancient Kemet. Every time Tar Seti is referred to, because Egyptologists are aware of the Africanity of that state and its connection, because it being the furthest south, its connection to the rest of Africa, they would always abstract it and act like it was different. They would treat it as separate, even though they knew it was the first nome. So this is a really big trick that they've played. And actually, unfortunately, it's basically a strategy that has worked even up until modern times. So even us who are, African or melanated people, independent researchers, scholars, we continue to fall for this. We continue to regard Nubia as a separate thing and not separate when they're talking about Nahesi, which was actually Kush, or Tar Seti, which was actually Kemet, which was actually Egypt. Egyptologists treat them both as Nubia. We need to be the ones to say, no, that's Tar Seti, that is Kemet. So it's really important that that's pointed out. Tar Seti was seemingly targeted by Egyptologists due to its overt phenotypic and cultural alignment with the wider African continent. So remember, they've sold this whole idea that ancient Egyptians shipped in there, or at least had this foreign military, this Nubian military. Oh, they used to get their military from Nubia. No, Tar Seti, land of the archers, shout out, big up to Smash Rockwell for that translation, because I used to think it was land of the bow, but Tar Seti, land of the archers, okay, that's a part of Kemet. So their infantry was never foreign. Their bowmen were never foreign. They were always a part of the nation. It was just Egyptologists who took these black bowmen and said, you're not a part of the nation anymore. We're going to regard you as foreigners. We must not carry on that trend. We must challenge it at every time that we see it come up, actually. So It's overt phenotypic and cultural alignment with the wider African continent. Historically, the city of Tarseti, which translates roughly to land of the archers or shooters, as surfactant has said, historically, the city of Tarseti, which translates to land of the archers, has been regarded as a parent civilization, a key trading hub, and on rare occasions interpreted as being an enemy of Kemet. Nubia's relationship with Kemet is one that is both endemically intertwined and culturally complex, even without the racially motivated distortions which continue to plague its modern placement in history. One thing that is certain is that the peopling of both civilizations were near identical racial stock prior to lower regions of Kemet, that is north of Egypt, being more exposed to foreign influence from the second intermediary period onward. So I really want you to have that as a takeaway. Okay, it's really, really important that we have that as a takeaway, and we understand its importance in Egyptian history, its importance in the history of the two lands. Okay, and not buy into these things that have been made up about Egypt's history and the separating of people who were actually indigenous to that land. Numerous portraits of Nubians and indigenes of Kemet exist to easily dispel any doubt about the amount of phenotypic and cultural overlap that existed between the regions of Kemet, including Nubia. So I've said there, Kemet, including Nubia. Okay, I'm talking about Tarseti here, and Kush, because those are your two regions, really, Kemet and Kush. Nubia, for most part, is an invention of Egyptology. And when I say invention of Egyptology, I am aware that there was a nation of Nubia that existed after the fall of Egypt, essentially. And this is where the gold, or the people of gold, Nub being the ancient Egyptian word for gold, and Ea being essentially people of or land of. So Nubia was just the land of the gold, essentially. Many of the native people ended up becoming citizens of Nubia when ancient Egypt fell. But we're not talking about that. I'm talking about in the time contemporaneously to the old, middle, and new kingdom. There was no Nubia. There was just Kemet and Kush. Okay, Nubia didn't exist, or Kemet and Meroe, or Kemet and Napata, depending on which time period we are in. Okay, so Nubian pharaoh, Egyptian pharaoh, Kushite pharaoh, Egyptian pharaoh, Kushite pharaoh, Kushite, Egyptian, Tarseti, Egyptians, I've put there, Kushite prince, Nubians, Tarseti, Egyptians. Okay, so I've shown you, well, there's this range of images, and shout out to Inyaba who actually put many of these images together, but really just show you how much essentially continuity there is in terms of the way they are depicted. There isn't this vast differentiation between the way they're being depicted. This image here, artistic representation in Kemet, and you can see there's a hand on here. Even though this image is faded, you can see how the hand is almost an intermediary between these two tones. Let's carry on. Two ancient Egyptian men portrayed with alternating colors, as you saw above. And then over here, the alternating colors, which I've mentioned before, is an artistic protocol that you'd find in ancient Egypt. The reason was so you could be able to distinguish between people. So what they would do is they'll take I would assume the most commonly occurring colors, and they would alternate them so you have contrast and you can separate one person from the other. So this is one of the reasons why we're able to see there's two people standing here, because they've made, and two people standing here and two people standing here. It's because they've made sure they've contrasted the complexions. So it is actually a rule of ancient Egyptian art not to put people with exactly the same skin color overlapping. That's a rule. Okay. Tomb of Hoi. Ancient Egyptians bring in offerings to collector. Complexion is alternated to show diversity, individuality. Tomb of Roy. Women and men appearing to be in mourning. Complexion is alternated between a rich medium brown and a lighter shade of brown. So you can see here, alternating colors again. Ancient Egyptian men fishing. observable attention of complexion between deep dark near black, brown, and deep rich reddish brown. So you can see here, once again, just that protocol of colors not overlapping and just trying to get that average between tones. Now, obviously, we can see, look at all the red, the ones that are kind of like that, that more rich brown. The surfaces have been damaged quite substantially. Okay, so it's quite hard to see what the original color was, but these ones, it's very clear to see what's going on here. All right. A close examination of Kemetic art reveals a sophisticated approach to portraying diversity. Alternating colors were frequently used in depictions of crowds, ensuring that the artwork reflected the broad range of African complexions, and clarity and distinction were preserved between overlapping figures. This protocol, it was a rule, followed Kemetic art through all dynasties. This technique maintained artistic realism in line with what was phenotypically consistent. So they're looking at where are we, or where are these group of people who are being portrayed here complexion wise. Let's get that range and let's have them alternating so we can show just a true artistic depiction of what we look like. This technique maintained artistic realism in line with what was phenotypically consistent, challenging the false and currently perpetuated notion of a singular racial identity, something that is impossible to find in any modern African nation. So when I use the word racial here, we're talking about racial in the sense of, you're light, you're dark. No, this is these people, the range that you get in African nations is vast. You cannot simplify, you cannot euphemize the expressions of phenotype that you get in African nations. And then there's this spread of images just to help. Let me zoom out so we get the full image in, just to help people who perhaps aren't familiar with African phenotypic diversity to see how that can kind of work. And by the way, I've shown you this range and kind of given labels to each people. I want you to bear in mind this, yeah? Any one of these nations could have people as dark as this and people as light as this. Any single one of them. Any one of these nations. And that's not an exaggeration. So we have a Nilotic here, an Omotic here, a Zulu here, a Rwandese here, a Hausa here, Nguni here, Tigrinya, Nubian, Amhara here. Okay? Any one of these nations, you could find someone as dark as this or someone as light as this. That is African phenotypic diversity. You could go into a family and you could have people who range from this dark to this light within a family. That's how African nations work. That's how African families work. So when people try to summarize us using a single black crayon, you can imagine we find it hilarious, okay? Because it just doesn't work like that on the African continent. And I could go into now, obviously, the knowledge that Africans have something like 20 times the amount of genes responsible for complexion differentiation as is found in Europe. So light skin or different skin complexions in Africa are far more complex than how they exhibit themselves on the European continent. But that's another whole different discussion that we could go into. The shades of Africa. This collage of modern African faces shows the gamut of facial types and skin complexions typical across African societies and often across short geographic spaces. Okay, I'm sure anyone who's on the call right now who is of African descent and even, non-African descent can tell you within their ethnicity, maybe even within their household right now, how many of these complexions are being expressed, how many of these tones are being expressed. I can tell you right now, in my house right now, everything from, I'd say I sit somewhere between the Omotic and the Zulu over here in terms of my complexion. And I can tell you right now, the range in my house alone goes all the way to around here, somewhere between here and here, Amhara and Nubian. That's the range within my house alone. So this is something we're very familiar with, and things that people do not pick up who are not, who don't come from that kind of variance. For instance, in the depiction of the siege of Darpur, the Syrian forces are shown with a distinct tone. Okay, and actually, the siege of Darpur is a genuine, unlike and this is the thing, I didn't mention that idea, whether or not it was true or not, it doesn't matter. So it says Nubians of the same complexion as Ramesses. So if this was true, and if by chance this image was what the reproduction artist saw, there are still several things that need to be addressed. The first one being the fact that the Nubians, as they're being described, or the Kushites, however they're being described, are of the same complexion than Ramesses. Some of them actually marginally lighter, even on this, which is a strange thing to do on this kind of reproduction. Although the original is now faded, the colors in this publicly displayed facsimile are believed to be representative of what the reproduction artist originally observed. However, the authenticity of the reproduction is in question, as I've mentioned already. One can assume the coloring convention was copied from genuine artwork seen in tombs. So this is what my suspicion is. My suspicion is that he's seen the artwork convention in tombs. They're aware of the fact that Kushites are often depicted between a very, very dark brown and the medium brown shown that matches the Egyptians, and they've kept that convention going. Okay, that seemed logical to them. Why is this significant? Let's read on and see why. The answer to this is somewhat the answer to this, well, it was the question that we're answering here. Was Ramesses II black? Sorry, I was looking for what question we're answering there. Was Ramesses II black? The answer to this somewhat clunky question, and I know it's a clunky question when I put it there, but it's important that we address it head on, is already self-evident in the fact that in the fact that ancient Egyptian art, particularly the battle release of Ramesses II, depicts the pharaoh and some of his Nubian adversaries with the same deep reddish brown complexion as the chestnut and roan colored horses. Now this is going to be very important, okay, because not only is Ramesses the same color as the Nubians, he's the same color as horses. And by the way, this is not an isolated event. In fact, every single time horses are depicted, brown horses are depicted, brown cattle is depicted, they're depicted almost or exactly the same color complexion as the Egyptians, or as sometimes the Kushites. So unless you believe there are red horses running around somewhere, I think we can all agree that the target color was brown. Okay, we can all agree that the target color was brown. Now, why is that significant? Let's have a look. Where was I up to? This is a common practice seen in tombs, stelae, and papyrus throughout Egypt in most dynastic eras. So have a look at this. This is another example. Okay, from the tomb of Uzahat TT 56, we have a horse, and we have the ancient Egyptians with the horse. Bear in mind, they're actually a tad darker than the horse. We know that the horse is not red, so what color is the horse? This deliberate chromatic alignment in Egyptian iconography was not arbitrary. Okay, so aligning themselves with the horses, and by the way, there's several stelae where you can find the same thing, was not arbitrary. It wasn't something that happened by accident. But once again, it was realistic. Artists meticulously rendered skin tones relative to their subject's appearance within the natural world. Crucially, modern comparisons reveal a telling disparity when non-African riders, pay attention, Europeans or Asiatics or modern North Africans are depicted alongside the same breeds of horses used by ancient Egyptians, that is chestnut, bay or roan. Their lighter skin creates a stark contrast. I'm going to read that last sentence again, and then I'm going to show you the depictions. Modern comparisons reveal a telling disparity when non-African riders, e.g. Europeans or Asiatics, are depicted alongside the same breeds of horses used by the ancient Egyptians, chestnut, bay or roan. Their lighter skin creates a stark contrast. Let's have a look at these images, just so we know that this isn't being made up. Okay, so this one is probably the closest, and this guy here looks like he's, anyway, let's say this one's probably the closest, but let's have a look at generally what you get. This is a white guy, and obviously massive contrast between his skin color and the color of the horse. Once again, massive contrast, not the same color. There's a modern kind of Arab looking guy, not the same color, clearly a different color. Asian lady, not the same color. This is kind of Asian looking guy, but not the same color. He looks like he possibly could be a modern Egyptian, clearly not the same color. Not the same color. You can see the contrast from back here. Not the same color. Okay. I think we did overkill with the examples, but feel free to type in someone riding a brown horse and see what it brings up to you. Okay. It's not that hard of a search to do. Okay. Once again, let's go back to our reference materials. Okay. Look at the color of the horse. Look at the color of the people. Look at the color of the horse. Look at the color of the people. Okay. Now let's continue with this exercise. So I'm just going to read the caption of that. Typical Eurasian and coastal North Africans. By the way, coastal North Africans is the kind of new terminology I give to the people who are not indigenous North Africans. So I will refer to indigenous North Africans, meaning the melanated North Africans, or coastal North Africans. So I'm referring to coastal North Africans here on brown horses. There's visible and notable chromatic divergence in that the tones of the horses and rider do not match at all. This is in contrast to the harmonious melanin spectrum observable between Ramesses, the Nubians, and their horses. Conversely, in imagery of black African riders, and by the way, I'm using black in the racial sense now, obviously not literally black, okay? And for example, here it says Nigerian horsemen of the Sahel, the Pule, or the Sudanese cavalry, etc. The skin to horse color correlation mirrors what is seen in Ramesses and other Egyptian reliefs, reinforcing that only populations with high melanin concentrations seen in modern Africans could be so seamlessly matched to these hues in ancient art. Without me saying any more, let's look at some images. I think we can all agree we have a match. Her hand is almost lost on the horse's head. Okay. We have a match. She's not light skinned. May I add? Yeah. Let's carry on. We have a match. Okay. Would we say that we have a match between the tone of the horses and the tone of the skin, which is why the ancient Egyptians didn't feel the need to mix new paint? We have a match. I mean, she's a bit lighter than the horse here, but it's good enough. I mean, if one horse isn't enough for you, how about 8? How about 8 matches? Is that close enough for you? African men on horses. We have a match. Look at his leg. Look at the horse. I mean, this isn't rocket science, guys. I don't need to give anyone a lesson in how to look at a picture. I think the thing that we can hopefully agree on is the fact that the artistic choice of the ancient Egyptians to depict the people in the same tone as the horses wasn't an accident. By the way, you can't find light-skinned horses. For those of you who are going, oh, maybe it was a different breed. There's no there's no light-skinned breed of horse. Okay, I'm sorry. This is what it is. It's either this or white or something like that. These were the horses. Okay, these were the horses. They've got names: Chestnut, Roan. For instance, yeah, these were the horses that the ancient Egyptians were riding, and this is why their complexion was shown to match, because it matched. Okay. We have a match. Okay, reddish. I look at the rich reddish brownness of the skin. This is just typical African skin. It's not rocket science here. We continue to have a match. We continue to have a match. Okay, it's not rocket science here, guys. Okay, this is one of my favorite images. I don't know why, I just really like this one. Beautiful image. Okay, and this child riding a horse, once again, a almost perfect match between the rich reddish brown tone of the horse and the rich reddish brown tone of African skin. This one's been edited somewhat, but it's funny, run it through a color channel and the skin and the horse. This wasn't me, by the way. I didn't do any of the editing, but the skin and the horse still managed to come out the same complexion. Although I might change that one because people were talking, oh, use the Photoshop. So I might change that one just for that specific reason. All right. So I think that's it. That brings us full circle back to the start. So I think you guys can kind of get where I'm going with that. Okay. Black people on brown horses. And I said it that way deliberately. Black people on brown horses, because people were like, oh, you're black, no. Black people on brown horses show the same kind of tonal continuity expressed by Egyptian artists. Okay. So we might be racially black, but just like Wildflower has just said, we are brown people. We are not, in the modern terms, classified as the brown race, but we are the only brown people in this region. This region of Africa, Africans are the only brown people. Not wheat, brown. Africans are the only brown people in Africa. So let me repeat that for those of you who are on this live stream and you perhaps don't get it. Africans are the only brown people in Africa. Okay, native Africans are the only brown people in Africa. Occupying the brown race doesn't make you brown. These are brown people. Okay, just so everybody is clear about that. Scientifically, this aligns with dermatological data, which suggests that eumelanin-rich skin type 6 exhibits the same. So this is talking about the thingy scale. I forgot what it's called. You know, I've used it, Fitzpatrick scale. Okay, exhibits the same reddish-brown undertones as chestnut horses, a pigmentation exclusive to populations of African descent. Excuse me. The closest living relatives to Ramesses' war horses, such as the Caspian, Akau Teke, or Barb breeds, often display these same historical colors. Yet no non-black group, just like what I was just saying a moment ago, shares the phenotypic overlap evident in Egyptian depictions. In other words, if you're from a group and that group's complexion doesn't overlap with these chestnut and roan colored horses, please, for the love of God, stop claiming ancient Egypt. Yeah, simple. Okay, stop trying to say, stop it. Okay, because they are quite overt. They're being quite overt about it. I'm just gonna put that out there. It's up to you. You know, you do what you want to do. Actually, I can't. Who can I tell you what to do? Who am I? Thus, while debates persist about Ramesses' ancestry, the artistic, genetic, and comparative evidence overwhelmingly supports that his portrayal as chromatically congruent with brown horses seems to be biologically implausible for non-African ethnicities. I'm going to read that. Well, I'll just read the last part again. Comparative evidence overwhelmingly supports that his portrayal as chromatically congruent with brown horses seems to be biologically implausible. That's my nice way of saying you don't quite get to those ranges, those skin tones. The skin tones necessary sit within the African ethnicities, not the non-African ethnicities, and not the coastal ethnicities. Okay. The burden of proof then falls to those who claim otherwise. Why would Egyptian artists systematically depict themselves and their rulers with this deep brown tone unless it reflected their known reality? Okay, it's not rocket science. Why would they depict themselves that way if they didn't look that way? It's just really, really simple. Okay, a close comparison of complexion. So once again, just to drive home the point, African man sitting on a brown horse, can almost get lost there. Okay, non-African man sitting on. Okay, I'm not gonna say non-African because he could be a native. Well, I use the word loosely, but it could be a native of perhaps like North Africa. But you can see the contrast in the complexion. It's not a match. Okay. Distortion of historical records. Ramesses II's fresco portrayed in a medium brown complexion, and the statue shows evidence of fading, indicating likelihood the original work was portrayed with a much darker brown complexion. And just to draw your attention to, I think we do it later, have a look at the top of the arm here. Okay, you can just about see my mouse pointer kind of going around there. You can see how dark it is. What we have here, the reddish part, is the undertone. You can see some of that darkness preserved around his face as well. Okay, so that very dark tone that Ramesses originally had, probably very close to what you see on this hand here. But we're looking at the kind of secondary faded artwork. Egyptologists have at times manipulated historical interpretations to fit racialized narratives. A striking example is the mistranslation of hieroglyphs related to Senusret III's battle scenes. Some have replaced the name of specific Kushite people, often regarded as Nehesu in ancient Egyptian Meduneta in hieroglyphic writing, with the generalized and racialized term blacks. And I know for a fact they did this in the British Museum right up until the early noughties. So I think it was when I saw it in the British Museum, I think it was 2008. They had a plaque that said, you know, Senusret III, I will keep the blacks out of Egypt. I will do this with the blacks, do that with the blacks. And I was like, that's really weird. It can't say blacks because Kemet means blacks. So he wouldn't be saying, I'm going to keep the Kemets or the Egyptians out. Okay, it was a terrible translation. That's what it was. They just decided to change the word Nehesu into word black, which is absolutely ridiculous. Introducing racial, ironically, Nehesu, I know a lot of people have got different interpretations for it. I actually find it's very close to the word for copper in ancient Egyptian, and there might be a root, there might be a link there. Especially since I'd imagine they would have been the ones who would have introduced metallurgy into Egypt. But anyway, let's carry on. Introducing racial prejudice where none originally existed or was being communicated. Such deliberate distortions persist in institutions like the British Museum, influencing public perception but not reflecting the obvious reality. The misinterpretation of Ramesses II's conflicts with Kush and the possible fabrication of conflict with Nubia exemplifies a broader tendency to oversimplify and often falsify African history. Recognizing the diversity within African populations and understanding the artistic conventions of Kemet allows for a more accurate and nuanced appreciation of the past. Ancient Egyptians should not be punished for their adherence to detail. I'm going to say this again. Ancient Egyptians should not be punished for their adherence to detail. In other words, people are expecting the ancient Egyptians to time travel to this bizarre world that we live in currently, see that the word black is being used to describe all people or who are even mildly melanated, go back in time and be like, no, sorry, this is all wrong. You must only use the black paint. Don't paint him with his actual skin color. Use only the black, because in the future, these people are only going to accept people we've used the black with as being African people. They're not going to do that. Okay, what they're going to do is they're going to draw what they see. If they were to draw me, they would use brown. That's the bottom line. There's not really two ways about it. Okay, but they should be respected. There is no reason to fabricate races of people, and I'm going to say this to all the people who are kind of like of these, maybe this Hamitic race, dynastic race, lost red race, even the modern Egyptians who are like, oh, well, they look like us, but they never use the colors that we are actually. There is no reason to fabricate races of people or align them with ethnicities outside of the African continent. There are people right now in Africa who have those complexions. Let me rephrase that. There are people right now on the African continent who have the exact skin tones that are used in ancient Egyptian artwork. Let that sink in, okay? There are people right now who have that skin. That means we don't need to go reaching, looking, creating, fabricating races where they don't exist. Just find those people and see if they fit the artwork, and you'll be surprised how easily they do. Since the evidence suggests that all of the phenotypic variants required to explain what is seen in Egyptian art is already present on the African continent. Okay, so that's the end of that article. I hope that was useful. Okay, it's quite a thorough article. It's available on the website. Like I said, I think this is the latest posted one. Okay, share it out there as much as you like. Okay, share it out there as much as you like. Let's get this information out as much as possible. So that's the first article I want to go through. Put a 1 in the chat if you're finding this interesting. And if you want me to move on to the next article now, I want you to give me I want you to hit the like button. But if you're tired and you've had enough, right? It's not been very long. I mean, I've still got a bit of energy. Maybe you can hit the 3. Hit the 3 if you're like, no, that's enough. Don't do the second article. I'm tapped out. But if you want me to carry on, hit the 1 or hit the like if you've already hit the like, or if you've already hit the like, just hit the 1 if you want me to carry on, and we'll move on to the second article. Okay, and we'll go from there. Crusher Pep says, if you're tired and hate the live, click the like button to let us know. Yeah, I agree with that. Hit that like button if you really hate the live. Okay, show your dislike by subscribing. Really take it to me, you know. All right, brilliant. I'm glad you guys were enjoying of this, and I'm glad you are not tiring of the knowledge, KW. Okay, let's move to the second article then. And I hope this is inspiring you. Those of you who haven't visited the site, to visit, subscribe, share, get it out there. Let's move on to article 2. This one, red race. Now, this one touches on some of similar concepts. This was actually related to I think there was another video linked to this. No, it was a live stream, so we're definitely not going to watch that back. But it had some interesting stuff, and the premise behind this discussion essentially was about the use of red and the exaggeration of how much red was actually the target color, and not just historically, but actually in modern times, how they will use image manipulation, they will use falsified communicate, they'll do all the tools to try to create this idea of there being a red race where there really isn't none. There's no idea of there being a red race. This is a pure fabrication. Ancient Egyptians painted themselves anywhere between pitch black and a deep, rich, medium brown. That really was the range. That you didn't see anything outside of that range in ancient Egyptian artwork. Anything that does fall outside that range, from what I've seen, is a fabrication. That's it. I can actually say that with quite a lot of strength. I don't see any genuine ancient Egyptian artwork where they've targeted a cream color and said, this is it. All you see is stuff that used to be brown that they've rubbed down, or stuff that's naturally faded, and they paint back the eyes and be like, yes, the target color, that was the target. That was never the target color. I wasn't born yesterday. What you'll find is that range that I'm talking about, medium brown to pitch black. That really is the range, and you'll find that they fit somewhere in between that range. Let me give a quick shout out to Dew Mario, for you've given me a $1 and a $2 donation. And he said, have you heard of the Finders cult? I don't believe I have. Feel free to share whatever information you have regarding that. Thank you very much for your $3 of donation, though. Really, really appreciate it. Let's dive into this article. Red race. So, lovely, lovely piece of wall art to introduce us. And I just want us to take a bit of time. This is from the tomb of Uzahat, to just really just observe this image and appreciate the deepness and the richness of the melanin being displayed here. These are deeply, deeply brown people. Okay? There's no red race being displayed here. This is just faded brown, deeply brown people. Okay? That's what you're seeing here. Tomb of Uzahat, a moderately preserved tomb, thankfully. The black pigment has degenerated for most of the men's hair. So we know it's faded because look how the hair has been treated. We've lost it in most of them. The hair is just... This is also where we get that lovely image of the men in the barbers. So can you see down here, the men getting their hair done. Those of you who haven't checked out my, I think it's one of my latest shorts about the different hairstyles in Kemet. I suggest you check that out. That's a really good one. But yeah, let's carry on. The scholarly discourse surrounding ancient Egyptian skin tone representation requires careful examination of artistic techniques, material preservation, and historical context. The surviving artifacts tell a complex story of pigment application, natural degradation, and modern interpretive biases that collectively reveal how the ancient Egyptians portrayed themselves. Another shout out to Dew. Thank you very much for the $5 donation. Wait for it to load up here. It says, look it up on Wikipedia. It was during the Satanic Panic of the 1980s. I will look that up. Let me just quickly remind myself of what you said it was called. The Finders Cult. I will look that up. I hope it's interesting. Maybe we will do a live stream on that in the future. Thank you very much for your now total of $8 of donation. I really appreciate that. Pigment use and artistic techniques across kingdoms. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit to make it a bit easier to see. Whoops, zooming in the wrong thing. Sorry. Here we go. Yeah, let's go there. The evolution of Egyptian painting methods reveals significant differences between old and new kingdom practices. During the Old Kingdom, we have our date range there. Artisans typically applied pigments directly to stone surfaces without preparatory layers, using thinner, more translucent paint applications that integrated with the natural stone tones. This technique explains why many Old Kingdom works now appear nearly colorless, with only faint pigment traces remaining in protected crevices. Now, I could talk for ages. I just want a quick shout out to Kat. Thank you very much for your $20 donation. No comment. You said, oh, and you have given a comment here. You said, keep up the good necessary work. Thank you, Kat, and I appreciate your $20 donation. It's very, very kind and generous of you. Now, what I was going to say is I can go on for ages about, obviously, I spend the majority of my time in terms of my research work in ancient Kemet looking at artwork. I do spend an immense amount of time looking at artwork. And the use of color on different materials in ancient Egypt really is very, very interesting. Limestone, obviously, was a massive favorite, but actually you'll find that most statues that you see, that you probably make the assumption now that they were never painted, actually were painted. Even ones that are granite, diorite, quartz, they used to paint a majority of their statues. What they did do in some occasions is they would look for stones that would represent a nice or be a nice or close representation of the skin tone, but this often would not be the case when they obviously use limestone, which was probably one of the most abundant stones that was available to them. And obviously we have our statue of Djoser here, where you can see there are some layers where the paint is preserved. The limestone happens to be a relatively good stone for absorbing paint, especially if you consider this statue of Djoser is in and around 4,500 years old. That's actually quite good that there's any paint left on it whatsoever. There's also the added issue with many of the ancient Egyptian artworks being sandblasted by the colonizers, the imperialists, and the modern Egyptians, because they don't like to have traces of paint remaining. They love getting their sandpaper out and doing their cleanup jobs, which we're going to touch on later in this article. But let me carry on. This technique explains why many Old Kingdom works now appear nearly colorless, with only faint pigment traces remaining in protected crevices. So crevices actually is the key. If you want to see what something was originally looked like, you have to get right in those small slits where they often, when they're using something like a sandblast or something like that, they haven't managed to get their tools into, or haven't naturally worn, if it's been a case that it's faded naturally. So you often have to look in those gaps to get the true representation of what the color they were after is. The New Kingdom, 1500 to 1070, witnessed technical advancements in artistic practices. I'll say some. Artists systematically applied reddish undertones before final coloring, used thicker, opaque pigment mixtures, and incorporated protective varnishes. These methodological developments account for why New Kingdom works often maintain visible coloration despite centuries of exposure, while their Old Kingdom counterparts have lost pigmentation. There's also the issue of an additional 1,000, 1,200 years, which can play a massive part. Macy, thank you very much. My member for 9 months. Cleanup equals vandalism. I totally agree. But thank you for that additional membership boost. As usual, providing lots of support. So I really, really appreciate that. We know that cleanup equals vandalism. By the way, actually, a little side note for everyone on the live stream. I am working on an extended piece that I'm very excited to announce that I've been making some good progress in it. So hopefully in the next maybe like couple of weeks max, I'll have it released. And this really is quite a comprehensive video that just basically covers the known deliberate vandalisms that have taken place. So not kind of ones that where we are unsure or where we're guessing, where there's guesswork taking place, the ones where we are absolutely certain that vandalism has taken place. And I think just having those summarized in a single video is going to be really useful for us as a community. I mean, for me personally, I know it's going to be massively useful. So I'm looking forward to releasing that as soon as humanly possible. New Kingdom bust of Pharaoh Hatshepsut. I'm sure, but most of you recognize that. There's this wonderful clip where Zai Hawass interviews that Nigerian journalist, and he's telling them, yeah, they were not black. They were black, but they were not Negro. And then she's standing in front of the bust of Hatshepsut, and she has exactly the same features and exactly the same skin tone. It's hilarious. It's kind of like, without even trying. I don't think she was even trying when she did that. That was the funny thing. Material preservation, wood versus stone artifacts. So this is quite a key. Stone statue of Nefertiti and Akhenaten, reddish brown color. So this is quite a well-preserved but still faded statue of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. But we do have some decent preservation. Once again, look at the deepness of the melanin, even though it's slightly lightened. Now, this wooden figurine of Amenhotep III, bear in mind that would have been the father of Akhenaten. Okay, statuette retains a very dark brown color, arguably very close to its initial color. So just have a look at the deepness of the brown on this. The only place that's slightly lightened is his face, and I believe that's because it's been tampered. I believe his face has been sanded down because certain parts of it just do not look right, especially around the mouth here. It looks like it's just been tampered. That would be very typical and would be the only reason to explain as to why the face is the only place where we don't have this almost perfect preservation of tone. Now, they hate people seeing this. They hate people seeing images like this because just look at the deepness of the melanin that's on display here. Look at the deepness of the melanin that's on display here. And the face here, which stands out, still looks like an African. That's the twist. They could sand it down all they want. It still looks like an African, but it just looks tampered. And obviously, if you've seen other busts of Amenhotep III, this one facially does stand out. But let's carry on. The superior presentation of pigments on wooden statues provides a crucial evidence for original skin tone depictions. Wood's absorbent nature allows for deeper pigment penetration and retention compared to stone surfaces. Middle Kingdom wooden statues like those of Senusret I display remarkably intact dark brown complexions that almost certainly reflect their original appearance. Now, I haven't got the statue of Senusret I here, but you can look for that one. It's kind of a striding statue. Just type in statue of Senusret striding or something like that, wooden statue, and you'll be able to find it yourself. I'm going to carry on because otherwise this article will take forever. In contrast, stone stelae and reliefs frequently exhibit only residual reddish tones, i.e. what's been that layer that actually touched the stone is all that manages to survive, which is normally that red layer that kind of seeps into the stone, but the rest of it seems to wash off the surface. Where the original darker layers have completely faded, this material difference has led to widespread misinterpretation, and it has been helped by people who are not accepting that the ancient Egyptians obviously were melanated people, with some scholars mistaken these degraded surfaces for intentional artistic choices rather than understanding them as artifacts of preservation. Gender representation and divine iconography. Now, this is a really good part. So I hope that you guys really do pay attention, because this is actually a really enjoyable part that I actually liked, drafting this. So the purported systematic depiction of men as reddish brown and women as yellow requires nuanced examination. While some artworks do show this pattern, it likely reflects natural human variation within African populations rather than rigid artistic conventions. So I know you guys have heard people make that argument. I know that because I was embroiled in a rather ongoing online debate with another content creator whose name I won't mention, where this was the main tenet of his argument. And actually it's an argument that many people from the Afro-skeptic field fall on, to say, well, the women are yellow, the men are red. This kind of simplistic, well, actually the men are brown, okay, and the women aren't yellow very often. There's a massive exaggeration, and we're going to talk about what actually was going on there with this alleged women yellow, men red, fallacy that people have picked up, and see if there's any truth to it. So many African ethnic groups demonstrate subtle undertone differences between genders, and I've spoken about this before, with women often exhibiting slightly yellower hues compared to men's reddish tones. This is a thing. This is a thing that's true in my family. It's not true it's not universal once again, but this is something that we can't take away from the realm of possibility. And that's the truth, that women in African families often display a yellowish undertone and men have a more reddish undertone. And there's a perfect example of that here with this image. Okay. This is not atypical. This is quite normal in many, native melanated societies. I'm not even just going to say African, just kind of native melanated societies. You'll see this kind of differentiation. And it's not men have been out in the sun working the fields thing. It's just a native difference that you can see. So when you see a statue like this, where the woman has a yellower undertone and the man has a more reddish undertone, it's not necessarily what is being communicated. Now, let me add to that. Color diversity among African men and women. And by the way, I'm not saying this is a unbroken rule, but I'm just putting it out there as something to consider, because we must take into account some of the traits and some of the trends and some of the things that we observe in our communities. They would have observed them historically. They're not new. African people haven't changed. We're still the same African people. Melanated people are still the same melanated people. And all the quirks that we have in modern African societies, I'm sure we had them in ancient African societies. The use of gold and yellow pigments for divine figures presents a separate consideration. So now this is something else. Deities like Hathor received bright yellow coloration representing their golden divine nature rather than a literal skin tone. So Hathor was always depicted in gold. Non-royal tomb paintings show women in various brown shades, demonstrating that the yellow woman theory applies primarily to religious iconography rather than everyday portraiture. Let's carry on. The hierarchical use of yellow and gold in ancient Egyptian sarcophagi. And this one's quite important. Archaeological evidence suggests that non-royal sarcophagi often featured bright yellow paint as a symbolic approximation of gold, a deliberate aesthetic choice rather than a naturalistic representation of skin tone. This practice reinforced a visual hierarchy wherein yellow pigment served as a commoner's gilt. Now, gilt, for those of you who don't know, essentially means a coating of gold, and where people who perhaps weren't as wealthy as the monarchs and the nobility, they would use a bright yellow paint to say they have a gold, quote unquote, gold coffin. Gilding as a noble's gold, i.e., people who were in nobility and perhaps didn't have the infinite wealth of the monarchs like Tutankhamun to make an actual golden sarcophagus, would just gild the top layer of their coffin. Okay, and solid gold as an exclusively royal prerogative. Okay, so just giving you those kind of 3 layers that you have there, i.e., yellow, gilded, or solid gold. This is what was used on sarcophagi, and often when people are confronted with that yellow or that gild, they assume that this is supposed to be a realistic depiction of skin color, and it's not. Unfortunately, due to millennia of tomb looting, most surviving examples are now stripped of their original gilding, leaving behind yellow painted surfaces that are frequently misinterpreted in modern displays as naturalistic coloration. Okay, so this is another example of where that yellow color is used and it's falsely attributed to being a depiction of skin color. So this is a depiction of a gilded Nefertari meritment. Okay, this is a gilded Nefertari meritment, not a yellow skin, but this is a deified gilded portrait of Nefertari meritment in her divine form, with Hathor just ahead of her here in her divine gold form. Okay, this is not a realistic depiction. So Nefertari meritment, wife of Ramesses, deified as a goddess. Case studies in pigment preservation and modern intervention. The seated scribe, blah, 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 that's just where it's situated in the Louvre, exemplifies both original preservation and modern distortion. Protected areas like knees, hands, and feet retain their original dark brown coloration, while the torso suffered aggressive 19th century cleaning that removed surface layers. Okay, very important to state that. When they first encountered, and I'm going to show you with there's a really cool slide over image that Inyaba worked very, very hard actually putting in place. So please do use this. This site has these little cool features that I hope that you guys engage with. Subsequent restoration created artificial contrast between the clean and untouched sections, fundamentally altering the statue's appearance. So this is the original statue, and I'm sure you guys can see that dark brown knee, dark brown leg. Look at the dark brown down there. This statue is not dirty. I repeat, this statue is not dirty. This statue is supposed to be dark brown. This statue is not dirty. This statue is supposed to be dark brown. But what do they do when they come across a statue like this? They go, oh, let's give it a clean. And obviously the result is as follows. Yeah, we're all familiar with what the result is. The cleaned, sunburnt lobster. The sunburnt lobster. You know, absolutely ridiculous. Yeah, we know that that was not the original target color. Okay, Do you like that feature, by the way? Give me a 1 if you like that little slide over feature. Okay. Give me a 1 if you like that. There's quite a few of those on the site. All right. Let's carry on. The Nebuchadnezzar tomb paintings present another revealing case: vibrant hunting and festival scenes, and a moderately well-preserved representation of the noble and his family. Nebuchadnezzar's statues retains a darker hue of brown than his frescoes on his tomb. So this is really interesting for everyone to see. So this is how Nebuchadnezzar's tomb appears in the British Museum, and I've actually taken my own images of Nebuchadnezzar's steles in the British Museum. They are beautiful. A few things to note, okay? His wife and his daughter are both, I would say, slightly darker than him. So once again, this challenges that conception that the women are always displayed in yellow because they didn't stay out in the field and they didn't get a tan. Well, this one breaks that, and this is one of hundreds of steles and tomb paintings that break that alleged protocol, because it never was a protocol. What other things can we gather from this? Well, once again, we can look at what's on display other than Nebuchadnezzar, that perhaps we can get an inclination of what his complexion's like. I.e., is that a brown bird or a red bird that's right next to his face over here? Is that a ginger colored bird, or is that most likely a brown bird? And this duck down here, is that a brown duck or a ginger duck? I think you guys know where I'm getting at there. It's very likely that this bird and this duck are both supposed to be dark brown, as would be normal colors. In fact, let me just have a look. It looks like a goose. Let me Google African goose and see what we get. I haven't done this before, but I like to do these random things. Well, looky here. So I've just Googled African goose, okay? And let me just quickly pull up the image so you guys can see what the color of an African goose is, and then do your comparison. Once again, open link in new tab. Okay, so no, not link. I want the image. Sorry, just bear with me. I love these little reveals. Open image. There we go. New tab. Let me pull this up. Quick reveal. I mean, you guys knew this was going to happen anyway. See, do you notice how confident I was to do that search? Because I knew that we weren't going to pull up a ginger bird. I knew we were going to pull up a brown bird. So there's an African goose. Maybe not the exact breed, but I can have a look through there. But I think we can all agree that we probably are dealing with a dark brown and white colored bird. I would say that's almost a good match. Maybe African duck. Maybe let me try African duck. See if you pull up. Not getting anything for duck. I think it might be. Could it be a kestrel? I don't know my bird breeds. If you guys know your bird breeds, let me know. Oh, no, it's definitely not a kestrel. I do not know my bird breeds whatsoever. I think the goose was quite close, but you guys, you get the picture. The point on the point of the matter is here. This is very likely a brown bird. I think we can agree. Okay, like this is very likely a brown bird up here. Okay, so we can get an inclination of what the original color of the people are, and even though they're still deeply melanated, it's just interesting to do that. Now, here's where it gets more interesting. This statue is a part of the Nebuchadnezzar collection over here, okay? And we can see here Nebuchadnezzar and his wife affectionately seated together. The statue retains darker pigment than the tomb wall fragment and partially reveals the reddish-brown undertone underneath. So we can see it. Have a look here. You can see the reddish tone underneath, but you can see the original dark layer that sits on top on both him and his wife. Now imagine if this had completely faded, they would be saying, oh, she's yellow, because you can see her undertone is different, but you can see that slight difference in undertone even exists on the wall painting where he's redder and she's more of a kind of a flatter brown. It's just, once again, attention to detail that is done in the Egyptian artwork. And once again, they're being punished for being very detailed in their observation. The Rahotep and Nofret statues, which we're very familiar with, display suspiciously uniform orange red tones, and clearly that's it. By the way, if you don't know the Rahotep statue, that's the tango statue. Okay, that's the you've been tangoed. And clearly painted hieroglyphic inscriptions. This makes the throne of Rahotep the only instance of hieroglyphics painted onto the stone, rather than symbols carved into it. Actually, I need to correct that, because having spoken to Professor Manu Ampim, he confirms to me they are carved, but they're carved very lightly, which once again is a strange thing, because the depth of an ancient Egyptian carving, normally minimum depth is got to be like at least half an inch, and then they kind of go deeper from there. These ones are like like really light carving of like a millimeter or something like that, and then black pigment. I mean, it's garbage, if I'm going to be totally honest with you. This makes the throne of outside. Let's carry on. The black paint on the hieroglyph shows no sign of degradation, despite the hair of Rahotep showing signs of color degradation and weathering. Also, one thing they probably didn't know when they made this ridiculous fake was that actually the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs were normally painted in color. So you normally had different colors on the glyphs. They were normally full color. You wouldn't see this kind of all black. This all black where the emphasis is literally just on the shape. That's an invention of the hieratic script, when they went into shorthand and into cursive versions of the ancient Egyptian hieroglyph. When the ancient Egyptians was just the Medunetta was just a wall language, a wall depiction, a wall art depiction, it would always be in full color. You wouldn't see hieroglyphs just written on a statue like this in black. So, I mean, they wouldn't have known this. There's many things they didn't know when they created this fake. They just kind of like, they just kind of went with it. But anyway, let's carry on. That was in doing glyphs in black basically was kind of came along with papyrus. That's when they started doing it just in a single color. The black paint of the hieroglyph shows no sign of degradation, despite the hair of Rahotep showing signs of color degradation. So have a look at that. The hieroglyphs are perfectly black, as though they were painted 5,000 years ago, which is ridiculous. This points to a recent repaint or total fabrication of the hieroglyphs. Further analysis of the hieroglyphs put to bed these suspicions. So this is basically just a nonsense. And obviously there's a whole list of reasons why Rahotep and Nofret were fake, which I'm not going to go through now. I suggest you watch my video that I did called Modern Fraud with Professor Manu Ampim, where he will give you an entire lecture, nearly 2 hours long, where he breaks down all of the reasons why this joke of a and I'm going to call it that, this joke of a fakery is not and should not be classified as a part of ancient Egyptian art. It just breaks so many protocols, which I can't be bothered to get into right now, but one of them being the hieroglyphs behind his head, which is just something that's not done. They should be kept by the hieroglyphs should be by the base of the stool, for instance, that they're sitting on, not by their head. I'm not going to go to the scrappiness of the way it's been painted. I'm not going to post too many spoilers. Watch that live stream if you get a chance. But anyone who's even marginally familiar with ancient Egyptian art, just looking at these two, knows that this is crap. They know they're not looking at something that is genuine. This breaks so many protocols. I could list them now, but I don't want to spoil it for those of you who want to watch it. Please do watch it. Yeah, hands should be flat. I mean, I'm not going to go to right now. These are a joke. Let's just leave it at that and move on. The uniform orange-brown color of Rahotep suggests that this was the target color of the statue. As expected of an artifact of Old Kingdom, there are no undertone colors beneath the superficial color. So you're not getting that dual tonality that we normally get, where we get the red, and then on top of the red, we kind of see little flecks of dark brown, etc., suggesting that we have some kind of a color layering going on. We don't have that. We just have this uniform tango color, which for some reasons, I mean, I don't know even to this day, why, you know, Zayawas and some modern Egyptians resonate with this. It's like, this isn't even your skin color, man. No one is orange. No one is this skin color. This is not human color. So I don't even understand why they claim, you know, they're so, have you seen Rahotep? It's like, yeah, I have. Looks like an orange alien. Looks like a character out of Guardians of the Galaxy. Doesn't look like doesn't look like anyone who's ever walked the earth before. It's like, come on. Let's not clutch at straws, people. We don't have to, you know, claim fake artifacts to make up. I mean, maybe they do need to claim fake artifacts. That's the point. The canopic jars of the boy king Tutankhamun show odd coloration. Unlike other canopic jars in ancient Egypt, his lips have been painted pink, and his eyeliners and eyebrows have been restored with black pigment to give a sharp contrast in appearance. In other words, this was all faded when they found it, and they decided to restore only certain parts of these canopic jars. And it's really ridiculous. These are the ones that ended up looking like Michael Jackson. Okay. This gives a false impression that the color of the stone infers a real life complexion, i.e. they were trying to say he was the same color as these canopic jars by just restoring certain parts. This was not the case. These should not be painted or partially restored, because then they wouldn't give you the impression that, you know, he's some pale guy with red lipstick on. And I mean, what, was lipstick a thing now? Are they trying to claim that the pharaohs wore lipstick? I don't even know now. I don't even know what they're doing these days. Canopic jars of Tutankhamun with lips painted red by modern handlers and black color restored. Now, for an example, in contrast of that, even though these are partially restored, we can see the canopic jars of Lady Kia. I actually believe some of these are canopic jars of Akhenaten, because they really look like Akhenaten. But anyway, show degradation of black pigment, while the one on the right has been partially restored. So you can see when they're just evenly faded, your mind isn't tricked into thinking that, you know, they look like Michael Jackson, essentially. So just more of the tricks used by basically the modern criminals at the Egyptian antiquities. But let's carry on. The wooden statue referred to as Keepa, this is one of their favorites, found in Cairo Museum in Egypt, retains very little color or varnish. The statue is of an Egyptian priest and scribe from the Old Kingdom era. His wooden statue has been made famous due to its highly intact state. Despite its lack of color today, the statue can be observed to have black eyeliners around their eyes, a sign of restoration on the part of those who currently house the statue, but it's curious that such specific detail is restored and nothing else. Now, when you see this statue, you often see that they really overexpose it and blow it up. It's clearly been, in my view, sanded down from the original dark pigment that it would have had. But even then, I still don't think they've been that successful in fully altering the Africanity away from this, because you can see some of the dark pigment on the leg there. But let's look a bit closer. He has waves, those of you who hadn't noticed, okay, in his hair, signifying natural afro hair. I mean, that's as a natural wavy hair texture as you can get. And it says here, the eyeliners around the eyes are a modern restoration, done to give the false impression that the current appearance of the statue was the intended target. But we can see from the appearance of the wood that whatever the top layer of varnish or paint that was sitting on top, it's no longer there. Okay, so the original paint or varnish that would have been on top of this statue has been sanded down to the point where all we can see are the veins of the wood. It looks like untreated wood. Once again, we got another one of these really cool slide over things here that show you just the little areas where original paint pigment has been retained. Okay, so let's carry on. And you can see even around his nose, that would have been a good place to put one as well. Okay. Fragments of the original color can still be seen around the eyes, and I'm going to say beneath the nose as well. So the chemical behavior of ancient pigments explains why many current appearance issues. Let me read that again. Excuse me, it's getting late, so this will definitely be a wrap up when we're done with this article. The chemical behavior of ancient pigments explain many current appearance issues. There we go. Iron oxide ochres, red and yellow, remain chemically stable over time, becoming more visible as other pigments fade. Carbon-based blacks carbon-based black outlines, being organic compounds, degrade faster and are frequently the first elements to disappear from artworks. Modern conservators often repaint these losses, creating false contrasts. I also want you to bear in mind that in the ancient world, in the modern world, our primary colors are blue, red, and yellow. And it's from these three colors that artists will essentially be able to mix and create any colors and any pigments. What you'll find in the ancient world before, relatively recent in terms of the kind of like more towards the, I would say even early modern era in some stages, blue wasn't really that readily available. Now we know that the ancient Egyptians did have access to a color called Irtu blue, but it wasn't a part of their mixing compound. They would kind of just leave it as an isolated color to show kind of like specific things. So the primary colors in ancient Egypt were red, yellow, and black. Those were essentially the three colors that they would get all of their pigments from, all of their different color variations from these three colors, as opposed to blue being the third color as it is now. So just bear that in mind in terms of when they're mixing these colors. The black is the weak part. So that's the part where all of these colors would have got their darkness from. The reds and the yellows, those are the ones that had the power of retention, so to speak, which is why so often it's the reds and the yellows that are left behind. So that's just a little bit of really low level basic science to kind of understand what's taking place with this color degradation. Let me carry on. Copper based blue and green pigments undergo chemical transformations, often darkening or turning black over time. Their degradation significantly affects overall color balance in surviving artworks, making original compositions difficult to discern without scientific analysis. So false color representation in media. Now this part of the paper, the article I should say, is actually something that you guys have probably noticed, but maybe on a subconscious level put to the side. But it's good for us to talk about it and bring it to surface again, because I think this is something that actively is taking place in the face of ancient Egyptian artifacts, fast and thick, being released to the general public. This is one of the techniques that's being used. So there's a little slide here. And I want someone, in fact, before I move on, I want to see, is there anyone in the chat who could tell me where they think we're going with this? So the title is False Color Representation in the Media. And then we have a slide here, essentially of the same image. Can anyone tell me or guess where we're going with this? I just want to see if anyone kind of picked up in the chat what we're about to talk about here. And I feel like I need to get interactive. I've been talking for a long time. Need a break. Who knows where we're going with this? JL, you're too sharp. Photo manipulation. Yes, that's actually where we're going. We've talked about the artifacts, being not really in this article. That's probably going to be set for a separate article. I'll talk about actual artifact sabotage and vandalism. But we're actually just talking about photo manipulation here. And this is something that seems relatively that's low level. It doesn't happens all the time, particularly with ancient Egyptian artwork. And we're not just talking about random people online, random people in social media who are just, doing it because they're just like, you get these Eurocentrists who just have these random hate boners for Africans and black people, and they're just getting involved in this discussion about it. They want black, and then they'll go and they'll falsify images, and then they'll create accounts and they'll pretend to be from Africa. They'll say, yeah, my name is Tunde, I'm African, and you guys need to stop investigating. I mean, these Eurocentrists, they be doing the most, I swear. They do a lot, yeah? But we're not even just talking about them. We are actually even talking about the institutions, yeah? The institutions even do exactly the same way. You'll go to their websites, you'll go to the actual websites of, Egyptian Museum, etc., and they are doing the same thing. They are using tricks of photo manipulation, exposure to basically change the appearance of artifacts that people see and make them look more red, to kind of move them away from that kind of Africanity that they're clearly showing. So many of the images in Egyptian artifacts on the internet are intentionally edited to falsely portray high contrast to give reddish skin tone. They do it also, some of you will notice, they do it with mummies as well. So they'll really overblow mummies and try and make mummies that are clearly really dark black or dark grey or dark brown, really dark colors, try and make them look almost white using this kind of photo manipulation. It's very bizarre, but very, very common. I'm sure you've picked up on it. I like the fact that people in the chat know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about those guys who pretend who pretend to be black just to kind of disrupt us discussing and talking about African history. It's just, I find it so bizarre. But anyway, unfortunately, the majority of ancient Egyptian monuments and arts are intentionally edited digitally to give a false reddish tone. To unsuspecting individuals, these representations online could be taken as factual. So, we have the musicians here. This is normally, often, I mean, this is even too bad, this one that's on the screen. Sometimes they're even lighter. But if you look at the original, this is much more like what the original looks like. See just the strong and rich brown color of modern Africans. Musicians in a feast falsely portrayed in reddish brown. And this is a famous one. You cannot find an image of King Tut's mannequin where he doesn't look red. The real color is brown. The genuine color of King Tut's mannequin is brown. But they expose it and over because they have to push this narrative. They have to push this red race narrative, and it's an absolute fallacy. But as long as they have control of the images. Oh, by the way, you guys will remember they don't let you take images of when I went to the Louvre, and the Neues Museum, and they won't let you take a photo of the Berlin bust. So there are even some images they don't even let you take photos of. Obviously, the Berlin bust is a fake, but this is the point. It's the control of imagery is exactly what we're talking about here. Tutankhamun's mannequin, a mid-brown wooden statue, is mostly shown in red with a reddish-brown undertone in the media, or literally just as a reddish statue. In rare instances where unedited media is made of these artifacts, a less red and rather brown reality sets in. So there's an image here, which I'm just going to play. Also, even on this faded stele, this is someone with, an average complexion of a quote unquote melanated or black person, and you can see that's almost a direct match, almost half a tone out, and that could be accounted for by the fading of the top layer. Okay. Once again, the deepness of melanation seen in the artwork is something unique to Africans. Despite having identical brown color to the man's skin tone, that painted figure on the wall is faded and would have had a much darker complexion thousands of years ago. I think we can all agree. And this was going back to what we're talking about, this kind of image of Ramesses, where you can see where the dark pigment at the top, not the shadow, but just beneath the shadow over here, you can see where the dark pigment originally is, and on his face as well, and how that would easily match the complexion here. A fresco of Ramesses often falsely portrayed in a reddish hue. Let me just quickly, here's with the slidey thing here, just with the arrows pointing. Faded portions match the skin tone of the black man's hand in the photo. A uniform portion of darker coloration points to a possibility of modern alteration on this fresco piece. So modern alteration or fading, let's say. Group representation of ancient Egyptian in arts. Ancient Egyptian artistic convention utilizes a broad range of colors for realistic and symbolic representation of individuals and groups of people. By studying preserved artwork spanning thousands of years, repetitive patterns of color representations have been observed that can be considered as cultural artistic convention by Kemetic artists. Color representations in Kemetic convention are not rigidly imposed, but rather depend on delicate nuances that can only be interpreted by understanding the cultural psychology of the people who made these arts thousands of years ago. Once again, I always stress, I think it's even on the homepage of my website, until Africans are included in the discourse regarding Nile Valley civilizations, they will make no sense. Ancient Egypt, ancient Kemet, Tawi, whatever you want to call it, the Nile Valley, Kush, Kemet, make no sense unless you include Africans in the dialogue. You need Africans to help you to interpret what was going on, what's taking place. People who come from a region of the earth that has no phenotypic diversity will not be able to comprehend how phenotypic diversity works within African households. They won't. They won't appreciate the nuance of what you see on the tombs of ancient Egypt. They won't appreciate the realism of the skin tones that are being used in Egyptian art. They will only see, well, you're black, so why didn't they use a black crayon? That's all they're going to see. They won't understand beyond that. Can I give a big shout out to Mr. Panther? Love your work, brother. Keep proving these fake Arab and white Egyptologists wrong. I'm right behind you. Let's call them Arab-centric and Eurocentric Egyptologists. But yes, absolutely, you're right. And we have to keep pushing our truth. It's very, very important because there's been such a... They've had carte blanche to essentially falsify ancient Egyptian history for so long, using such stupid arguments and blind people to what they're actually looking at. They've been doing this for years. Thank you very much, Mr. Panther. I appreciate your contribution and your very, very valued input. Unfortunately, African cultures that share similar cultures, have been ignored, and Egyptologists have over depended on their own divergent cultural worldview to understand this alien culture that wouldn't be so strange if they were to be viewed through the African lens that it was known to be from. In light of this inadequacy of cultural perspective, African scholars have taken the initiative to understand, corroborate, uncover, and debunk color understanding within the Kemetic cultural sphere. On frescoes, it is observable that groups of people are represented with alternating tones of skin color. This not only represents the diversity of complexion within the Kemetic society being portrayed, it also aids visual appreciation of individuals within a group. So just look at an image like this, okay? This is something that anybody from a melanated background is going to be able to appreciate. Anyone from a melanated background is going to be able to appreciate this. So Tomb of Fury, collection of gold and other tributes. The crowd is distinguished by alternating shades of brown complexion. I've already explained why alternation is used. We've looked at this image already and this image. Now let's move on to... Due to the use of color symbology in Kemetic art convention, it is important to isolate artistic representations that show realistically the appearance of the inhabitants of ancient Egypt in realism as they saw themselves. Wooden figurines found in various tombs display day-to-day activities in ancient Egypt and show the people of Kemet in a lifelike manner that leaves no room for speculation. And I love these wooden figurines because there are just so many of them available. There are so many of these figurines available. You'll find them in museums all over the world. They're in the British Museum, they're in the Louvre, they are in the Noyers, they are in the Vatican, they are everywhere. You will find these wooden figurines, okay? And they are always very unambiguous about what is being displayed. From armies to mercenary soldiers to burial ceremonies and domestic work, various aspects of life are captured in action and color. How much more descriptive could the ancient Egyptians have been about their appearance than this? they couldn't leave any less ambiguity in regards to who they were. Very, very clear here. Now, by the way, to be clear, if you look, some of them have got kind of like this light patch on top of their head. That's because it's very likely that most of these had that kind of hair, the afro, and the afro thing's been picked off, and so where the glue, which was holding down the flattened afro, has kind of been picked off, it's left this patch on top of their head. And obviously that can happen. I'm not saying, by the way, that was sabotage. That could have just happened as a result of these being several thousands of years old. But the point being, that's the reason why. But if you look at the complexion, if you look at the skin, and this, what's nice actually is that that little patch on top shows you what the color of the unpainted wood is in comparison to the very deliberately darkly painted skin complexion of the wooden figurines. I'm sure we've seen this. Okay, this is the ancient Egyptian infantry. Okay, native Egyptians, native Egyptian hairstyles. Look at the complexions. Rich, deep brown. That's about my complexion there. So yeah, I'm cool with that. You have the archers, people of Tarseti here, not necessarily Kushites. Let me stress that. Not necessarily Kushites. These could be people of the first nome. If we have archers, I'm going to assume these are people of Tarseti, so these are people of the first nome. These are also ancient Egyptians, just like the infantry here. Now, there is the question about how deep the first nome went, and this is one of the reasons why often the Egyptologists would classify the first nome Tarseti as being Nubia. It's just easier for them to just cut it off and say, oh no, this is just Nubia, Tarseti is just Nubia, because sometimes Tarseti would reach very deep into Kush, very deep into the southern regions. It might include all of Sudan at a certain stage. What do you do then? Because if it's the other way around, this is what I want you to think about. If it was the other way around and the Roman Empire, yeah, was expanding into Germany, yeah, they wouldn't turn around and say, oh, well, that wasn't a part of the empire, you know. They would claim that with both hands and say, yes, you know, the Roman Empire expanded here, and yes, and they built this and they built that. So this is where you have to be consistent with your application of history there. So if there are points where, you know, the Egyptian, you know, boundaries encompass larger parts of Africa, then why don't we talk about that more often? Once again, just something for Africana scholars to think about when we're revisiting. And this is a nice little close-up what I was talking about with the kind of like the scalp showing where there was possibly, in my view, they all had that kind of like afro on top, and some of them has been peeled off, hence we have the lighter showing. I'm not sure if all these people would have been bald or would have been shaved, even though, I mean, we could talk about shaving, the fact that only melanated people can shave in the Sahara. I mean, that's just logic, okay? unless you want expedited, super catalyzed, you know, melanoma to the scalp, I suggest that only melanated people could shave their scalp in a fiercely hot nation and a fiercely UV intense nation. But I don't think they were bald. I think they would have all had these hairstyles initially. Once again, that deep pigmentation. Okay, these are women. And like I said, these are everywhere. This one's in Thebes, or this one was found in Thebes at least. There's literally so many of these wooden figurines, and they're all very, very consistent in terms of the... Now, there are a few restored figurines. There's not many of them, but there are a few restored figurines where they've got that yellow paint out, and they've even got weird colors out for the women's dresses and stuff like that. But you'll see them, and they stand out like a sore thumb because they look like, oh, they were painted yesterday. Notice how none of these look like they were painted yesterday, None of these have been restored. You know that you're looking at the original colors here. Just something worth noticing. Let's carry on. The representation is clear and absolute on how ancient Egyptians saw themselves and the complexion they chose to realistically portray themselves in. One doesn't need to look far away from modern Egypt or the African continent to find populations such as these. When we talk about modern Egypt, we're talking about obviously the native black population that are still present and should not be ignored. Nubian representation with reddish brown. Now bear in mind what we already spoke about regards to Nubia. Nubian and ancient Egyptian history is intertwined together for as long as Kemet has existed. Many scholars agree that Kemet was an offspring civilization of Nubia, of the southern regions. And some have gone further to refer to the entire region encompassing both Kemet and Nubia in all matters of material and immaterial culture as the Nubio-Kemetic complex, which is a term that I hear some researchers and creators using. I think Nile Valley civilization or Nile Valley complex is perfectly descriptive of that culture. It's a distinctive culture. It's not Maghrebian, okay? It's not, certainly not Levantine. It's a very distinctive Nile Valley civilization that exists, to use the words of Anthony Browder. Despite the fact that both civilizations are actually near identical in almost every regard, some, especially those of Eurocentric extraction, prefer to treat these two regions as distinct despite evidence to the contrary. And we could talk about all of the literary evidence. We could talk about all of the historians from Diodorus to Strabo to Herodotus, who essentially just constantly refer to Egypt and the Ethiopians. Egypt and the Ethiopians just refer to them as kind of this single homogenous group, or one's influencing the other. Normally Ethiopians influencing Egypt is a constant thread of discourse throughout the classics, throughout the the Hellenic period. There's this viewing on them being a single entity, in terms of a single cultural entity, I should say, not a single nation, but a single cultural entity that have a shared origin. Where was I? Nubio-Kemetic. Okay, I'm here. There is no room of doubt that Nubians were of black or melanated African stock, as was their culture. All of academia agree with this, and as history would have it, Nubian representation in Kemetic artworks, both as rulers of Kemet and as foreigners, are abundantly available. These portraits show Nubians as phenotypically indistinguishable from ancient Egyptians in most cases, leaving only a hint of culture to tell them apart. Literally a hint, a smidgen. Sometimes very hard to tell the Nubian princes apart from the ancient Egyptian ones. In the case of Nubian pharaohs, they are virtually identical to other pharaohs who could be considered as non-Nubians. So what do we make of the instances of kings and foreigners? Oh, that was a real yawn. We all know to be black or melanated Africans being represented in reddish brown complexion like their ancient Egyptian counterparts. Do we also entertain the possibility that these Nubians were of red skin complexion, like many view the ancient Egyptians, or do we accept the artistic reality for what they are, which is deeply melanated black people? And then we have another spread of that same image, which I know we saw in the other article. The physical features of Egyptian art maintain striking continuity of modern African populations. Hairstyles include tight coils, braids, and distinctive Kemetic short twist. Find direct parallels in contemporary East African traditions. I would say East and Central African traditions, Roman era and Southern. But anyway, let me carry on. Roman era depictions of Upper Egyptians, such as Dendera Acrobat, confirm these were authentic cultural practices rather than artistic conventions. The Dendera Acrobat he's talking about there is that statue of that man on the crocodile that's in the British Museum. Let me see if I can pull it up for you, actually, because it'd be good to have that visualization really quickly. And I think the reason that was mentioned, Thanks for your patience, guys. Let's just pull this up. So the reason this one's been mentioned is because the hair. Okay. This is, by the way, is an Egyptian. This is a man from Dendera, classified as a Tenchute tribe. Okay. So this is a Denderan, and the Denderans were known for their alleged disdain, or at least their ability to control the crocodile. And that's why he's been displayed here on top of a crocodile. He has the native ancient Egyptian hairstyle that we see on many of the nobility, that ancient Egyptian short twist. He has a very African build. I think we'd agree. Yeah, I think we'd agree he's got a very African build. But this is an Egyptian. This is an ancient Egyptian. There's no two ways about it. I'm sure people have no problem agreeing that this is a very, very African looking man, but this is an ancient Egyptian also. Okay. Someone said, yeah, them ninja glutes. Exactly, them ninja glutes. Yeah, so anyway, let me get off my screen before I get demonetized. Where were we? Facial characteristics including broad nasal structure, full labial morphology, and pronounced zygomatic arches align with Nubian and Nilotic populations. The argument that these features represent wigs or stylized representation lacks evidential support from comparative anthropology. So, restructuring in African Egypt, the cumulative evidence from artistic techniques, material science, just catching up there, and cultural comparison confirms that ancient Egyptians portrayed themselves as they physically appeared, as dark-skinned Africans. The apparent red appearance of many artifacts results from differential pigment preservation favoring iron oxide survival, compounded by modern restoration practices that exaggerate lighter tones. Only through rigorous, bias-free examination of the material record can we properly understand ancient Egypt as an African civilization in both cultural achievement and physical anthropology. The artifacts themselves provide unambiguous testimony when studied with proper attention to their material history and technical composition. And that brings us to the end of the second article, and I think to the end of this live stream. Okay, so I did want to do that live stream as a little bit of a advert for the site, because I want you people to be using it as much as possible, to be sharing it as much as possible, to be circulating this information as much as possible, because this site will continue to grow, continue to put a good image, but also we can see that in terms of the information, the research, it's all there. Everything that we need to understand the ancient Egyptian civilization is certainly all there for us. We just literally need to engage with it as much as possible. Let me put the link back in the chat, since I forgot to. Oh no, I've pinned the comment. So Green Sahara said, what article is that? If you just click the link, it will take you to our website. And I think this is the second article down. Today we looked at the two top articles. I encourage everybody, get involved with the site, register if you haven't already registered and subscribed, so I can stay in contact with you regardless, please. Jared said to subscribe, peasants. How very dare you. Yeah, thank you. I hope everyone's enjoyed it. Let me know what you thought of the live stream, if you kind of enjoyed that format. It was a little bit different, but I think it's kind of a wrap now. Isn't that Sphinx on the wall? Yeah, I never really looked at that. Is a Sphinx on the wall? Yeah, it looks like a Sphinx. Or you got me thinking there. I'm not sure actually. I'm not sure. That's something to look into. There you go. Do you ask what does Nehesu mean? Not 100% sure. I think there's a lot of debate. I think it means copper or bronze. There's a word that's essentially pronounced the same way in the Medunetta. So it's Nehes. The word is Nehesi. Nehesu would be the plural. Okay, so it's Nehes or Nehesi is the word for someone from Kush, essentially. Nehesu would be the plural to say people of Kush or the Kushites or the people from that region. But there's debate over what the actual word translates to. I think it translates to something very close to the word that they had for, I believe it was copper. So it might be, but that's just my personal belief. I'm sure other people have other interpretations. But yeah, that's all I can give you at this stage. Christy, thank you very much for your $5 donation. And thank you, Jew, for your other $2 as well. Chris, your first live, you made it all the way to the end. I'm glad you did. Nerd Large says Southerner. I'm not sure. Actually, because I know the words north-south is in Nesut. So there could be something in there. There could be that. Because I know the word north, I know Nesut BT translates, there's something in, I know people say it's the two lands, but there's something in the Nesut that, and Nesut also used to be pronounced Suten. So you put the Sut first. You can get Suten or Nesut. And I believe Suten is where they got the word Sudan from. And I know Sudan also means south. So Nehesu, Nesut, could mean southerner. That's interesting. That's I think that makes sense. I'll look into that. I'm not gonna say yes or no because I have no idea. But I think that's a interesting proposal there because it could mean southerner, or at least I should say it sounds similar to something that I know is translated to southerner. But I don't know if it's a reach. Drager, thank you very much. You said, have you gotten in touch with other From Nothing and Home Team History YouTube may be helpful to each other? I'm going to say no. And I'm going to say because we're on different trajectories. That's my kind of like nicest way to put it. I think we're on different trajectories. Home Team, I think, is absolutely fantastic. I'm going to be honest with you. He's been around for a long time. Takes a slightly more mainstream approach to history, but absolutely, I'm not a hater. I think he's fantastic. He's been great for the community's growth, and I hope he continues to do what he's doing. I think he's an amazing content creator. But I think we're on different paths, and I wouldn't try to impose myself on them. That's just kind of how I'd say that, basically. But yeah. Yeah, I think we'll call it a day there. Sudan doesn't mean land of the blacks. That's a modern interpretation. So I'm glad you said that, actually, because a lot of people think that Sudan means land of the blacks, and it doesn't. I think Sudan has its roots in the word south. A lot of words that so the black semantic kind of connotation that we have now, that very much is exonymic. In other words, it's something that was imposed onto that land, and that word became associated. There's many words that we have this with. So we have it with Sudan, where indigenously they called themselves the Sudan, and then people who were from outside said, well, this is where the darkest people are from, so we'll say that anything black is, they'll start first of all using the word Sud or Sudan to describe black things, and then they'll turn around and they'll say retrospectively, therefore Sudan means land of the blacks. And it's not. It's the same thing with the word Moors. Moors did come to mean black, but initially Moors or Mori or Mauritania was an indigenous term that was related to water. Okay, the ancient Egyptian word for canal was Mer. The ancient Egyptian word for waters was Mer. Okay, Meri was land of two waters or many waters, and that's where the word Mauritania or Mori would eventually come from. But then obviously the European or different people who interacted with the Mauritanian, the Moors who were black, then started using the word to describe black things. Another example of this is the word Negro. A lot of people think the word Negro was Spanish for black. No, Spanish picked up the word Negro. The word Negro comes from the word Negrisha, which comes from the word Niger, which is the river, as most of you guys know, in that runs through West Africa and the Sahara. And the people who boarded in the Nigers will be called the Nigeros, first of all, and then they will be called the Negritas. Okay. And then that land was called Negro land. Okay. And then the Spanish started calling things black in relation to the people from that region. And that's how the word Negro then spread through Europe. But it wasn't an exonym imposed on that nation. The Niger, the name of the great river that runs through Africa, predates the use of that word Negro, but they have the same etymological root. So there's a lot of words that basically just end up meaning black, but didn't mean black as an endonym. That was kind of like exonymically imposed upon those nations as a result of surrounding nations essentially being lazy. Now, another reason why this can happen is because color plays relatively didn't play a massive role in ancient societies. Color wasn't actually the most useful way to describe things. So often people didn't have names for certain things. So it's quite useful to describe things in comparison to things. So we live in a world where color is very real. I'm not just talking about race. I'm just talking about color in general. We have a color for everything. We got yellow, blue, black, turquoise, this, that, the other, blah, blah, blah. The ancient world didn't have this perspective of color. Everything was described in relation or metaphorically to something else that existed. You know, kind of like we do with this thing is a strawberry. It looks like a, and then you would put something there. You know, so often for a lot of people, the blackest thing that they knew were the black people of Africa. That was often the darkest thing that they would interact with. Okay, they didn't have bottles of tar sitting around. They didn't have. I'm looking around my studio right now. I can see a black keyboard, a black laptop, a black television. They didn't have all of these black things just lying around. What's the most natural black thing that you can think of in nature? Think about that now. Like, take away all this black plastic that we've got and these kind of like artificially colored things, and go take yourself back to a time where everything around you is natural. What's the darkest thing that you're gonna see? Might be me. I might be the blackest thing you see all week. Yeah. It might be someone, it might be a Dinka, it might be a Newer, it might be, they might be the darkest thing you've ever seen. And so it's only natural. Coal. Someone said coal. Yeah, good. Coal is a good one. Coal is another good one. And that's why essentially, well, if you look at the Medunetta, what was their symbol for the word black but a charred piece of coal? So just think of that just helps you to kind of understand where the origin of these words came from and why it became useful or expedient in populations who maybe don't have a reference for something that's being dark to say, oh, it's Negro colored. Oh, Negro. Okay, I get it now. Black. You get it? So that's kind of like where a lot of these words get their origin from. Did you know? So thank you, Drew, for another $2 donation. She said, did you know there used to be giants? I think there's a lot of evidence that there used to be loads of weird and wonderful things on this planet. I'm not opposed to the fact that there used to be very tall statured people. I mean, arguably the Dinka are still giants to some people. They're the tallest population on the planet. Many of them are over 7 foot, and imagine a world where short statured people were the majority, because you don't have to go back too far. Go back a few thousand years in Europe, and short statured people who we call pygmies now, were the majority population. Now imagine them confronting a population like the Dinkas. Yeah, that would be, I'd imagine they'd call them giants. But where they're taller people than that, very possible. I don't know. I need to do more research in that area. Nerd Large says, me have been waiting for that N-word etymology vid for a minute. Yeah, that needs to come. I'm sure we can I'm sure we can sort something out. Zulu are pretty tall, someone just said as well. Yeah, that's true. And the Twa, obviously the Batwa people are very short. The Kwene people are very short. So this, imagine that contrast in Africa, you know. Think about some of these biblical tales where they talk about, you know, if you go back to, you don't have to go back too far where the world had a kind of like short statured majority. And I actually don't think Pygmy people get enough credit for their for what they've imparted in history and for their contributions. I think modern kind of more tall statured humans take a lot of credit for a lot of work that was done by Pygmy populations, but that's a whole different discussion. But any of you who kind of like have studied ancient history in Europe or Africa will know that, yeah, a lot of these people are the originators of societies and originators of many of the civilizations that we kind of know now, which would surprise a lot of people. All right. Let's call it a day. That was a good live stream. I really thoroughly enjoyed it, everyone. But I'm going to wrap it up now because it's getting late here. It's 11:30. I think we started at 8:45, so that's a long stream. It's been going over for, let's see, yeah, it's over 2 hours. It's like over 2.5 hours. So I think we're good. Thank you very much for everybody who joined. We sustained a crowd of well over 200 for the most part. I think we peaked at around 250, which is fantastic. Hope everyone enjoyed it, and I hope you guys are all finding value in the website. It's going to get better and better. I promise you that much. Please do subscribe if it's within your means. Feel free to leave a donation. I'll be very, very grateful because it will help with the upkeep and with the hosting fees, etc. And you know, if I'm going to grow my team, and I'm going to need to pay them for the work that they do as well. So, but anyway, regardless of that, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed it, and yeah, let's wrap it up. I'll see you on the next one. Take care. Have a good evening. Bye bye.